Hi, everyone. Welcome to Unwinding the Public Health Emergency, How to Prepare for the Harmful Impact on SNAP, hosted by the Food Research and Action Center, or FRAC. I'm Steve Hayward, FRAC's Senior Communications Coordinator. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few brief housekeeping items. We expect this webinar to run about 60 minutes. We are recording the presentation and will send the recording and slides in a follow-up email. Closed captioning is available. To turn captions on, click the CC button in the bottom taskbar and select English as the spoken language. At the end of the presentation, there will be time for questions and answers. To ask a question, please use the Q&A tab. With that, I'll pass it off to Gina Plata-Nino, SNAP Deputy Director at FRAC.
Happy Tuesday, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We know your time is valuable, and we want to make sure that the tools you get today can assist you in the advocacy you're doing on the ground. We have a very much timely agenda for our work today, Unwinding the Public Health Emergency. We are going to get started with Irene Lewis, FRAC's Policy Analyst, where she will give an overview of what this means and what the unwinding will entail. She will be followed by Michael J. Wilson, the Executive Director of Maryland Hunger Solutions, who will then be followed by Ruben Canedo, Director of Strategic Equity at the University of California, Berkeley, and Dawn Secor, Policy SNAP Manager at Hunger Solutions New York, will close us down as they all will give us an overview on what to do with our students, with administrative waivers, and with our able-bodied adults without dependents. We do urge you to please go ahead and put questions in the chat. We will have an opportunity once Dawn finishes speaking to answer the questions that you may have as we keep going. You will be getting a follow-up email with this information, with the PDF and any resources that the speakers have mentioned, as well as a recording of this webinar. Thank you all for joining us today, and I will turn it over to Irene. Thank you.
Good morning or afternoon, everyone. As Gina mentioned, I am Irene Lewis, a SNAP Policy Analyst at our team at FRAC. And so if you don't know, FRAC is a national or advocacy organization that is focused on ending poverty-related hunger through advocacy, partnerships, and advancing bold and equitable policy solutions. Next slide. And so we wanted to start off, our speakers today are going to give you an amazing sort of conversation about what the end of the public health emergency means for both advocates and SNAP clients. But we wanted to start off with sort of what is the public health emergency and what has that looked like over the past several years. Next slide. So if you aren't familiar, the Federal Public Health Emergency, or PHE as we've called it, has been something that the Department of Health and Human Services within the last couple of administrations have put in place. It was first declared in January of 2020 and has continually been renewed. And so when the Biden administration continued to renew the public health emergency, they promised to give at least a 60-day notice prior to when they plan to end it. And so in January of this year, the Biden administration announced that they would not be renewing the public health emergency anymore. And so the PHE will be set to end on May 11th. Next slide. And so with the public health emergency, there are a lot of provisions put in place across the federal government to support families and households sort of deal with the really huge impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so we're going to focus specifically on what that has meant for SNAP. And so, we've been really leaning into three key provisions that Congress put in place around the public health emergency related to SNAP. The first one that Michael J. will cover is that in the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, Congress suspended the 3-month time limit on eligibility for unemployed and underemployed, what we call able-bodied adults without dependents, or ABAWDs. And so Michael J. will get into more detail of what that means. But that has been a huge priority for us at FRAC, is ending that time limit. And so this has been really, really instrumental in supporting low-income families across the country. Secondly, in the Consolidated Appropriations Act in December 2020, Congress extended SNAP eligibility for more college students. And so as many of us know, the eligibility for college students can be really, really difficult. So basically college students have to meet one of several exemptions to be potentially eligible. And so Congress added 2 additional exemptions to that list. And that is also set to unwind when the public health emergency ends. And then finally, also through the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, Congress put in place these administrative waivers to support states and counties offering some flexibility in administering SNAP. Next slide. And so I wanted to give a timeline of what the PHE unwinding would look like. If this doesn't make sense now, when our speakers speak, hopefully this will put that into more context. But as I mentioned, the PHE is set to end on May 11th. With that extended student eligibility is put in place for 30 days after the PHE. So college students have until June 9th to apply for SNAP under that extended eligibility. And if they apply after, the rules will go back to those traditional college student rules. On June 30th of this year, those state and county level SNAP administrative waivers will start to end. On July 1st, 2 really key things will happen. First, states are responsible for reinstating that 3-month time limit on ABAWDs. And then secondly, for college students who are recertifying their SNAP cases, those recertifications will happen under those traditional student rules. So if a student came onto SNAP under that extended eligibility and they're recertifying on or after July 1st, if they don't meet one of the traditional student rule exemptions, then they may potentially lose eligibility. And then finally, in October of this year, that's going to be the first round of able-bodied adults without dependents losing their eligibility if they don't meet the strict requirements that Michael J. will go over a little bit later. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, great. And so before we dive into our speakers, some of the things that we wanted to highlight and we wanted you to keep in mind as we go throughout this presentation are some key lessons that we got from the PHE and SNAP implementation during that time. The first one is that I'm, sort of new to the anti-hunger work, the policy work collectively, and one thing that I've learned is the power of collective action in this work. And so it was really the advocacy and the pushing and the holding administrations accountable during the pandemic that made it possible for these flexibilities to be put in place. Secondly, we saw how critical federal nutrition programs, but specifically SNAP were in preventing huge spikes in food insecurity and poverty during the pandemic. So a report that USDA released a few months back said that emergency allotments in combination with SNAP allotments lifted 4 out of every 10 households out of poverty in the early months of the pandemic. And then finally, with these flexibilities, we really saw what could be possible with the SNAP program that eases administrative barriers for both clients and states. And so again, we'll talk more about that throughout the presentation. And when we get to our legislative priorities, how we're using these lessons as we prepare for the 2023 Farm Bill. But for now, I will go ahead and hand it off to Michael J. Wilson.
There we go. Thank you, Irene. Once again, my name is Michael J. Wilson. I'm the Director of Maryland Hunger Solutions. And I'm trying to think, I think the reason I was given the part to talk about ABAWDs is because it's a policy about which I feel so very strongly. I am very much animated in talking about this. And so let me talk about it the way I normally talk about it, which is in a way that, it shows how animated I am about this. So able-bodied adults without dependents is a portion of the SNAP population. And I'll talk about how this came to be. But these are folks who are between the ages of 18 and 50, who are not disabled, who are not pregnant, and who don't supervise a home with a minor child who's also receiving SNAP. And so this exempts a big part of the SNAP population and focuses on a small part of the SNAP population. But I want to talk about how we got here. And this was a discussion that happened in the 1996 Welfare Reform Act, when it was the Republican Congress led by then Speaker Gingrich and then Majority Leader Dole and the Clinton administration. And there was an effort to limit SNAP participation so that people could only get SNAP for a short period of time. The theory being that if we give people SNAP and access to food, they have less initiative to go and work. They have less reasons to go out and do the work that needs to be done. And we build a culture of welfare and of people just wanting to have benefits. I'm going to get to that later, but that was the central argument. And there was an attempt to do this in the welfare reform, and it was vetoed by then President Clinton, and then they narrowed the scope, and then it got vetoed again. And the folks who were finally left outside of this are the folks who are not in the SNAP population as we've defined it. So people who are seniors, people who are disabled, folks, children under the age of 18. And that was that made sense because those groups of folks aren't likely to go out and work. They aren't going to be workers, as we say. But when you look at the real SNAP population, we also know that's the majority of SNAP recipients. The majority recipients are folks who are children, who are seniors, and who are disabled. That's the majority in every state. And what's left is people who are working or who, for one reason or another, are not working. But of the folks who are left, most of them are working. And this is one of the ways that SNAP plays a part in the workplace and in the community and in the whole panoply of benefits, how it plays an additional role. So we're not talking, what we're talking about here essentially is the working poor. We're talking about folks who are low income, but either are not making enough income or who are not getting enough hours to be able to escape poverty, and therefore they're eligible for SNAP. And here's the critical point that we all recognize. When we're talking about ABAWDs and having a time limit that, you can only get, SNAP for 3 months in a 36-month time frame because you aren't working enough or you don't, then that's what we're essentially doing is we're really using time limits there. Because these folks are not earning enough is the way they are living their lives. It's the way it really reflects what they're doing. And when we think about that, we think about all the reasons why people aren't earning enough that are harder questions to answer for policymakers than to just say, we're going to cut you off. And so when I say work requirements, you should mark down this date because I never refer to them as work requirements. They're not really work requirements. What they really are is time limits because most of these folks are working. And the folks who are not working are the folks who have a hard time getting and keeping a job. We all know, especially for those of us who do outreach in our local communities, how hard it is to get a job if you're homeless. We all know how hard it is to get a job if you've got kids and you don't have childcare and how expensive childcare can be. We all know how hard it is to get a job for folks who are returning from incarceration. We know about the employment discrimination that happens in the workplace, even in 2023, based on race, based on immigrant status, based on prior incarceration, based on gender, based on age. All of those things are real and not only prevent people from getting jobs, but sometimes prevent people from even continuing to hold jobs. And so recognizing that, the time limits are problematic for not just those folks, but for our entire communities, as we want to make sure that people have access to food. This is why we have been such strong supporters of Representative Barbara Lee's bill, HR 1510. HR 1510 is going to take us back to the pre-ABAWD time. And we need to do that because ABAWDs are created based on a flawed concept that there are some people, pardon the way I say this, that there are some people who are just living on the dole, getting fat and happy on other people because they can afford to just get SNAP. And it's that false narrative, that myth, that mythology, which is rooted in racism and all other kinds of issues, doesn't recognize the reality that we have. And so we really want to make sure that we don't call them work requirements, because as I often say, work requirements are the soft way for mostly politicians to feel better about themselves for kicking SNAP applicants off of benefits. These are folks who we know are eligible because the states have deemed them eligible. We're taking them off of benefits because someone has decided that they're not meeting the requirements of work that a policymaker thinks they should meet, in spite of whatever else is going on in their lives. So I'm going to wrap up with just the highlights of this, and I want to make sure I leave time not only for my fellow panelists, but also for the questions that I know are going to come. They are not work requirements, they are time limits. They impact broader population, parts of the population than just the ABAWD population. They impact the entire community. You know, as we say, it makes no sense for people who are coming back from incarceration, who are getting in while they're incarcerated, 3 hots in a cot, they have meals and they have a place to sleep, and to come back out into our community and be told that they're not going to be able to get food. That's not good for them. That's not good for our communities. That's not good for our country. And then lastly, we can have a policy conversation about this. And I think Barbara Lee's HR 1510 is the way we begin to have a thoughtful conversation about how people who are on SNAP, how they can be able to move their lives forward and not just be kicked off because of a rudimentary time limit. And with that, I will pass it on to my next colleague. Thank you.
Good morning, y'all. This is Ruben. Thank you so much for the phenomenal opening to today's conversation. I'm really grateful that today we're truly centering on both humanizing, caring for, and ensuring that our community at large has the up-to-date information as we transition in this particular area that has had a substantial micro, meso, and macro impact on our communities. My name is Ruben. I use he, they pronouns. I serve as a Director of Strategic Equity Initiatives at UC Berkeley, and I also co-chair our UC System-Wide Basic Needs Committee that represents our 10 universities across the state of California with over 280,000 students. So I'm gonna lift for you all the specific areas that we wanted to lift for you all with regards to college students in this transition strategically so that you all can amplify these and organize accordingly. Next. First and foremost, we wanted to make sure that folks understand the language of basic needs and what does include. Basic needs are essential. They impact all of the areas of a student's trajectory, considering, applying, enrolling, their first year retention, their persistence, their performance, and their completion of their college degrees. When we think about basic needs, California held a conversation facilitated by our governor's office to bring our public higher ed segments together, interview and focus group students. And what we came up with is that basic needs are fundamental for students to experience a sense of dignity and success. This includes, but is not limited to, food, housing, financial, health and wellness, child independent care, transportation, technology, and broadband. And it calls in the acknowledgement that this is an interdependent responsibility that must be shared across higher education, but also local, county, and state governments. Practitioners and advocates must actively be involved in this work and making sure that we center the student experience because we know basic needs are going to change over time. Can you imagine 50 years ago, lifting technology and broadband as a basic needs for that generation of students? It would be a completely different conversation than what it is today. Next. What we want to lift here is to just show for folks who are like myself, data nerds up in here, and that when we make claims that they need to see the data. So what I'm showing you here is the open source democratic dashboard that we have in the UC system that has been tracking our basic needs efforts over the last 8 years. And what we show here is that students coming out of high school or students coming out of community college unfortunately experience challenges that directly impact the academic metrics of success, that then calls for us to not just think about basic needs as a feel-good volunteer experience, but as an absolutely essential institutional priority, given the fact that we need to retain our students, we need to graduate our students, and they should have the best ability to perform, meaning their GPAs at their highest abilities. Sadly, at the moment, students that struggle with basic needs are also the students who have lower retention rates, lower graduation rates, and lower performance rates in terms of GPA. Next. Well, what we have done in California is we have transitioned into a successful culture and strategy that has expanded the basic needs conversation beyond food pantries and has lifted the proactive work that can be scalable at a systemic level for SNAP or CalFresh. In California, we call it CalFresh as a rebranding for the program. So when you hear me say CalFresh, I want you to receive it as SNAP as it's known nationally. What you see here is, for the first time, we partner with a California Policy Lab to track how our enrollment pace is going. And what you see here is an upward trajectory of UC undergraduates and graduate students alike have been in a steady incline of students that have applied and enrolled in CalFresh or SNAP. In this last academic year, we just published our latest data. We served 18,242 students. If we use the 60% approval rate average over a 6 month period, the local economic impact at a low level would be about $16.4 million, and at a high level, $22.3 million. Why is that important? Because that's money that is going to our students' EBT cards, and they're using in local establishments, supporting majority mom and pop grocery stores and so on and so forth to utilize those dollars. That is a return of investment that is incredibly positive and beneficial for everybody involved: the student, the county social services offices that are paid by enrolling community into social services, our local economies, and in turn, the well-being of our state and our country. As many of you all know, the state of California provides the highest amount of federal taxes that then fund all of these federal programs across the country. Next. That has been affirmed by lifting that CalFresh SNAP has now been a priority that has been established for our regents, which is the governing body of our 10 universities, the governor's office in California, and has been lifted in the national strategy from the Biden-Harris administration to end hunger, to increase nutrition, and improve the overall health of our country. Next. So this here is specific strategies that we wanted to share with you all today for the college student populations that you all are immersed with in your respective locations across the country. The first strategy that we wanted to share with you all is, next, you can go ahead and click on that. There we go. Prioritize relationships and organize from a relational location. Higher education cannot do this work by themselves. Social services cannot do this work by themselves. Local, county, and state governments cannot do this work by themselves. Once we started organizing, y'all, and prioritizing the relationships of bringing public higher education together, uniting with the anti-poverty coalitions, anti-hunger coalitions, community advocates, and our local, county, and state governments to really champion this, we started to change the culture, tone, and possibilities, because some folks had misinformation or gaps of information that stopped them from really committing to supporting college students as we support all of our other communities in our local context. I want to make it very clear, y'all, we have no interest in reproducing the hierarchy of human value. We love and believe in our communities at large. We're lifting college students because they have been historically left out of the strategies and priorities and scaling models of social services. And it was the relationships and organizing together that changed the culture and the trajectory of the impact data that I just shared with you all. The next strategy to lift for you all is to make sure that we are bringing yes energy into our efforts. There's a lot of no energy that is keeping us from moving in this generic direction. So I want to make it very clear to everybody in this space together. Yes, college students are eligible for CalFresh and SNAP, by meeting the federal exemptions that are outlined, and then we're going to go into those next. And yes, enrolling college students can provide funding to our counties and our local businesses that accept EBT. Oftentimes we hear from our counties, we're under-resourced, we don't have capacity, we can do this. And when we ask them, hey, by the way, how are you funded? Because when we hear that you need to increase your capacity and your resources, that means money. How do you get your money? And we followed the money line, and it got to the point that they get their funding allocation, at least in California, by the amount of community members that they enroll. Therefore, by improving the training, the outreach, the application quality, and the enrollment of college students, they are solving the issue that is currently being presented, that they don't have the resources and the capacity to do this work, which is very exciting and very affirming to move in that direction. And the last strategy that we wanted to lift for you all today with the time that we have available is that there's an intentional preparation and strategy, if you will, to scale high quality applications and enrollment. On the college and state agency side dedicated to higher education, the partnerships with financial aid are absolutely essential. Financial aid has the infrastructure and the technology to send personalized text messages and emails to the students to introduce them to SNAP and CalFresh, to educate them on the exemptions that they are fulfilling and about their potential eligibility, and hopefully pointing them to an on-campus or local community member that is trained to support students and submitting high-quality applications. And on the county side, for our social services, is to partner with them to make sure that higher education provides them any training materials and that create a college support material so that it simplifies the EW's experience and processing that application. So next, what I wanted to lift for you all is the fact that you are not alone and that we are very, very grateful to be in this journey together. Next. We're just clicking here, y'all, because I got creative with it. And now we're saying next, all kinds of things just so the information pops up. I don't want y'all to feel alone in this. If you go to basicneeds.ucop.edu, all of our materials are open source, democratic for you all to look at and use as a model if that can be helpful. Click one more time. And I'm also lifting for you all our USDA California Higher Ed contract team. They're absolutely fantastic out of Chico. We've been organizing them for years and then produce materials that are helpful for community colleges, state schools, and research universities so that you all have access to those materials. And again, don't feel overwhelmed that you have to do all of this by yourselves. And lastly, I wanted to put it here front and center. Huge shout out to our USDA and Department of Ed community. If y'all here, sending y'all some love and appreciations. They have been very proactive about lifting college student SNAP information at the beginning of the year leading up to this point. And most recently, as early as last week, the Department of Education provided a beautiful map out of all of the key information that we need to know to ensure that we support our college student population through this transition. Thank you all so much for your continued championing. Thank you for lifting college students. Thank you for your time and energy. And we're excited to continue in this movement together, making it as healthy as possible and bringing as much joy and pleasure to it as well. Passing y'all back the mic.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dawn Secor. I'm from Hunger Solutions, New York. And I'm going to talk about administrative waivers and the unwinding of the federal pandemic health emergency. Next slide. So just a quick minute, Hunger Solutions New York is a statewide organization. It holds one of the largest SNAP outreach grants. We have SNAP application assisters, either in person or remotely, across our state. We advocate with state agencies on each of the programs listed here, including SNAP and all the child nutrition programs. And we have a website with tools, outreach materials, and policy information on each of these federal nutrition programs for CBOs across the state. Next slide. today we're going to talk about SNAP waivers, and particularly the SNAP administrative waivers and SNAP adjustments that were afforded to states during the public health emergency and made a huge difference ensuring that people still had access and could apply and recertify and use all the processes during the pandemic. We're also going to talk about how to determine what waivers your state has taken if you don't know, and we're going to look forward. Next slide. So what is a SNAP waiver? The definition of a waiver is the act of intentionally relinquishing or abandoning a known right, claim, or privilege. So in this instance, it would be intentionally changing SNAP federal rules and policy. SNAP is a federal state partnership with federal laws setting out basic rules, eligibility, and operations. And USDA has a significant permanent authority to grant waivers of particular rules for projects for research, demonstration, and evaluations. And these include 3 different buckets: state options, demonstration waivers, and regulatory waivers. And advocates play a huge role in getting their states to look at and request these 3 types of waivers based on circumstances in the state, including barriers that advocates have identified. And while we're focusing today on the regulatory or the administrative waivers, I'm going to briefly explain all 3 just so we sort of know what the differences are. So SNAP options, SNAP statute, regulations, and waivers provide SNAP agencies with various policy choices. State agencies can use this flexibility to adapt their programs to meet the needs of eligible low-income households in each state. This flexibility helps better target benefits to those most in need, streamline program administration and local SNAP office operations, while coordinating SNAP activities with other federal nutrition programs. Each option has its own rules, and some are SNAP policies like broad-based categorical eligibility, where states must follow guidelines, but still have flexibility in details. So for example, for CAD-L, states must remove the asset test, but they can choose what % of poverty to set up to 200 and for who. While other options are things like the Elderly Simplified Application Project, which require the state to request approval through an application process with evaluations, backup data, and laying out what the state is going to do. Other examples of state options are things like states can choose the certification length of simplified reporting or online applications and what parameters are around that for states. The second type of waiver is a SNAP demonstration waiver, and this came through the Food and Nutrition Act of 2008, which provided authority to USDA to conduct demonstration projects to test changes to SNAP that may increase program efficiency and improve SNAP benefit delivery. This authority is one of FNS's best tools to encourage state innovation, as it allows for piloting and evaluating new ideas that may lead to new approaches in SNAP administration. States have to request demonstration waivers from FNS and follow a process that includes evaluation on the project. And then lastly, we're going to talk about how FNS can grant regulatory waivers, which is what we're focusing on today, or what we call administrative waivers. And here on the slide, we have the 2 instances when under federal law, USDA can provide these waivers. So first, and what we're going to focus on mostly is when the specific regulatory provision cannot be implemented due to extraordinary temporary situations. And boy, did COVID test that out, right? We suddenly had offices closing, we couldn't be in person, and we had to figure out really quickly, like, how is SNAP going to work in this new environment? And so under this instance, we got several things that we're gonna look at very closely. The first is administrative waivers of SNAP policy due to COVID-19 and the federal public health emergency. And then through congressional action, the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, or I'm just gonna call it Family First, allowed for SNAP adjustments. And, you know, this was like building a bridge, right? So when we talk about it, it sounds like it all happened really quickly, but it happened from 2020 through 2021 and even into 2022 in terms of USDA kind of building a bridge in terms of what was available, how long, what states had to do to get these things. And so FNS has continued to provide updated guidance to states throughout the pandemic about extending these waivers and adjustments as COVID-19 continued. We're going to talk more about that second bullet when we get to looking at the future. But next slide. So these are the SNAP administrative waivers. At the outset of the pandemic, using its existing authority, USDA began granting some state requests for waivers of particular SNAP state administrative procedures. So states had pointed to social distancing, remote operations, workload issues as factors in why they were seeking a variety of waivers. Many of the waivers were denied, but there were also ones that were approved and states were able to utilize. So as you can see here, most of these end on June 30th, which is the month after the date of the end of the public health emergency, which is May 11th. But there are a couple here that can be extended, and those are the fair hearing timeframes. States can ask for an additional 3-month extension. And also for quality control face-to-face interviews to be done by phone. States are allowed to extend this through September 2024 if they work with USDA to get that approved. Next slide. So now we're going to look at the things that I think most advocates were engaged in. We're working with their states around. Certainly we were in New York. We're tracking. We're kind of trying to figure out what everybody was doing. And this is a larger list. And this list really impacts SNAP recipients. The other one, the administrative waivers did too, but I think these were more changes that people recognized and saw as ways that they could continue to access SNAP even though we were going through a pandemic. So these opportunities came through the Family First Act. And Congress initially gave USDA specific SNAP waiver authority to grant certain SNAP state waiver requests. And this allowed adjustments in issuance methods and application and reporting requirements to be consistent with what was practical under the conditions in affected areas, which was everywhere in every state, in every community, right? So it was hard to get away from. There was nowhere that was not experiencing this. And then Congress also provided states with temporary flexibility to make some adjustments to cert periods, interviews, and other SNAP operations without getting prior approval and letting them do these things for 3 months at a time and re-upping while that time frame was going by. And so trying to make it more seamless as we continued through the pandemic. Because no one knew, right? How long was this going to last? What was going to happen? And then USDA continued acting to extend the duration of and procedures for states to keep these adjustments implemented. And as you can see, there's a bunch of adjustments here. They include things like enrolling SNAP households without an interview if they had the information needed for processing the case, streamlining methods for accommodating telephonic signatures, extending cert periods for up to 6 months, and simplifying reporting requirements. So all like really crucial procedures that happen when people are applying or recertifying, trying to stay connected to that SNAP benefit. And these end on June 30th, which again is the month after the end of the public health emergency. Next slide. So if you hadn't had time to take a look, or if you didn't know how to find out what your state was doing, USDA has this great webpage. You can see that the whole country is here, so you can click on any state. So you can use it to look at your state. You can use it to look at states near you in terms of what are other states doing that you might want your state to do. Or you can say to your state, hey, you know, I know we're in Tennessee, but Georgia is doing this, and they have similar like rules to ours, and why don't we look at doing this? So this page includes, when you click on your state or any state, you'll see a history of what waivers the state has taken during the public health emergency. And it's much more than just the SNAP waivers and adjustments. It includes emergency allotments, PEBT payments, and child nutrition program waivers and flexibilities. Next slide. So we've talked about how these things are ending on June 30th. We've talked about kind of looking forward and learning lessons throughout this webinar. So there is efforts to think about going past, once we get past the public health emergency, sort of what happens in states and how unwinding will affect states and what things can continue to be waived after the public health emergency ends. So FNS understands that SNAP state agencies still face many challenges. Many continue to rely heavily on family first adjustments and other administrative flexibilities to manage high caseloads, issues with staffing, among other issues related to COVID, right? And so to further support SNAP state agencies and SNAP applicants, FNS is offering administrative waivers for certification periods or processes using authority to approve waivers under the second bullet on the slide from a while ago, which, well, actually, I'm sorry, both bullets. So in extraordinary temporary situations, which we're still in, even as we're unwinding the federal public health emergency, and also in waivers that would result in a more effective and efficient program, administration of the program. And so there are opportunities still for states to extend some of these. States are going to be allowed the option to implement waivers before the federal PHE ends to provide states the flexibility needed to address caseloads and other administrative challenges. And FNS has said that they can approve these waivers for implementation periods of up to 12 calendar months. So this includes streamlining recertification procedures, where a state can use a periodic report procedure to establish a new cert period in lieu of routine recertifications. Waiving the interview, both at application and recertification. This was a big thing that helped, especially when lots of people were applying and states could not keep up with that. And here in New York, we are still seeing that. So states may waive the interviews, provided that applicants have verified identity and other mandatory verification. Another waiver that's being extended is adjusting the follow-up procedures when an address change and updated shelter cost is not reported. This one is a little more wonky. And I did give you a link to a chart that includes some of these and explains what they are. But this is, if the state agency has verified and cleared information that a household's address has changed, but the update or shelter cost is not known, the state will send a notice to the household and adjust the shelter, only adjust the shelter deduction if the household responds. If they don't respond, the state will wait until the next cert before they include that new shelter cost. And then the last one is allowing alternative methods for recording telephonic signature. And this allows state agencies and CBOs to document verbal attestation in the case file and provide the client a written copy of the completed application. For this particular one, for telephonic signature, FNS has said that they will approve this beyond 12 months after the federal pandemic health emergency is lifted, because it would result in a more effective and efficient administration of the program. And once again, street cleaner outside my window, but I'm trying to let it go by. Once again, advocates play a critical role in working with the state to help understand and request these waivers going forward. So I hope that gives you an idea of all the things that were possible during COVID and what you can still talk with your state about as potential waivers after the federal pandemic health emergency has ended. Thank you.
I want to give a very special thanks to all of our panelists for giving us such a great overview and, more importantly, tools that we can utilize in our advocacy. We wanted to frame, there's a lot of these issues. There's a lot of work that has to be done in order to mitigate some of the harm that is being done by the unwinding of the public health emergency. But we want to talk about some long-term fixes that we can do in order to assist our low-income individuals. So wanted again flag closing the meal gap, which is going to be introduced soon by Representative Adams. Again, we had the emergency allotments ending. That was a temporary fix that was very beneficial from individuals. We learned a lot of lessons from that, and it's part of the reason why we're facing a hunger cliff, right? Because hunger is still high, but all these resources that were available for individuals are now taking away. So this bill will provide long-term sustainability to ensure benefit adequacy for individuals. And Michael J., he echoed this multiple times, which is HR 1510, which is getting rid of the time limits, this harmful rule that was implemented in 1996. So we are actually going to be sending you, as part of our follow-up email, a template so that you can send to your federal delegation, asking them to sign on as co-sponsors of this bill, and also a fact sheet that you can utilize and to talk about this, because the way we talk about it is very important, right? So it's time limits. These are already individuals who are working extremely hard on not being hungry and trying to make ends meet. And this is a very draconian punishing effort, like Michael Joe said, is just to keeping another way to sort of harm SNAP. We talked about college students. Thank you, Ruben, so much talking about that, right? So now our college students are going back into having to have additional barriers in accessing food. The EATS Act, which will be introduced by Representative Gomez, will get rid of those exemptions, which will treat college students as any other applicant around SNAP. So it's very important to get rid of these limitations that make it more difficult for certain populations to apply. And then we're also supporting our other Farm Bill priorities, which you will be able to find, next slide, which you'll be able to find again in our follow-up email. But all of this information, our webinars, our toolkits, can be found on the SNAP at the FRAC emergency hunger cliff site, where we're also talking to the rest of you across the country to see what are the best practices, what is succeeding, and how we can help you, because you're very busy trying to make things work. So we're really grateful for your time. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, if we can assist you with administrative waivers and so on. And we have a couple of minutes left. We have 10 minutes left, which I'm going to open for Q&A. I'm going to ask our PowerPoint to be taken off, and I'm going to ask our panelists to turn on their video and join me, and remind folks that, again, this is being recorded, but you will have a PDF of the presentations as well as the recording and any resources that our panelists shared. So I'll ask our team to go ahead and unmute yourselves, and we have a a very easy one. We'll start with that. Dawn, so this one's for you. Who is the entity that can request these waivers?
It is your state agency. And so that's why you are so important, because states may not know. Just because these waivers exist and there's lots of guidance on it doesn't mean that your state is always paying attention. There are other things happening, especially during COVID. And so advocates can be a really helpful presence to remind states and to talk to them about how these waivers and adjustments could help them better manage during this crazy period when it was really difficult for them and for our SNAP applicants and recipients.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we keep honing in on this, develop those relationships. If you want to get this information out to your state and you don't know how, or you want to connect with other partners, feel free to reach out to us, because we can connect you with some individuals that may be working on the state and already doing this work. Michael J.
Yeah, Dawn's exactly right. And I want to echo what she said, that it's your state agency that makes the decision, but it's an advocacy opportunity for all of us to advocate with our state agencies, to advocate directly to your governor, to advocate with your state legislators. There are lots of targets for you to advocate in order to make that happen with your state agency. Don't start with the first no. There are lots of folks we can ask who are policymakers who can have a role in this. And as Dawn said, the state agency makes a decision, but as advocates, we have lots of opportunities to ask people to make the right decision.
Thank you, Michael J. And then Ruben, I know you answer a little bit in the chat, so we're going to turn a little bit to you about our college students who, on top of dealing with life and school and making ends meet, now we're adding this on top of them. Can you clarify just sort of what the action steps are for college students in terms of applying before June 9th? Just sort of before the deadlines, and I'm happy to clarify that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we really want to be intentional, and I appreciate the way that you framed the question itself, because we need to be student-centered in this moment. Not all students are having the same college student experience, y'all, and I'm sure all of us know that. So depending on the capacity of the student is what they have, what they don't have, so on and so forth. I think the key message to students today and always is we need to norm and celebrate a culture of care and asking for help, because oftentimes our students are either gaslighted or shamed into not asking for help because of notions of like, you should be an adult and take care of yourself, you're too smart to be struggling, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the message is to actively affirm students that if they need our support, to reach out, and that we're here for them. That we're all learning together, and that the ideal timing for them to apply to something that they are already should be on is always, right? Like if we can get them to apply today or tomorrow, and even on the other side of this transition, we're still going to be there for them. That's why, to me, one of the biggest things that the community that we've been organizing with is, let's lead with yes. Yes, we can support you now. Yes, we can support you tomorrow. And yes, we're going to support you even after the pandemic, the public health emergency status is transition, because we should always be there for our students. As y'all can think, we have students who are first generation, low income, have intersectional identities with multiple challenges, and they're going to the same classes and have to compete with peers who don't have any of those intersectional identities and don't have any of those challenges or are resource privileged, yet the academic trajectory doesn't equitably adjust to their capacity to perform. So the more support and care that we can provide for them today and always, the better.
Thank you, Ruben, for centering us and understanding that not all of us have the same leg expertise. And I just also want to hone in that, and I just want to give all of you who are watching, who are on the ground, just a huge kudos, because you're just dealing with a lot, right? And so you don't have the capacity to address all of these issues, but I want to make sure that that we make sure that applications, right? We try to encourage, and there's another deadline that we're putting on students as they're trying to get into finals. If they haven't applied for SNAP, do it before June 9th so they don't have to jump through the additional hoops. If they have to get recertified, do it before June 30th. And we'll include the memo that was sent out on this. We'll include the deadlines. All of that is, like Ruben said, if we can get someone in and we can say, hey, let's do this for you, let's help them as much as we can, because they do have a lot of things going on that. And I want to shift a little bit to Michael J. And when we talked about able-bodied adults without dependents, and how do we make sure that we are elevating voices of these individuals and that we're speaking to our legislators so that we don't get turned aside by red herrings.
Yeah. So I think it's important always to have the conversation, because we aren't all starting in the same place, the same knowledge base, the same understanding. And also with the same, we have different myths. There are people who think that they know what a SNAP recipient looks like because they have that fixed in their mind, whether that's true or not. And so whenever we do advocacy in Maryland, we always try to use folks who can speak their own truth and use their own lives as examples, and not the least of which is because it can help to shatter the myths that policymakers have. So it's about having information, clear information about who's impacted and who's not and what the rules say, but it's also having a story that demonstrates that someone who is a SNAP recipient isn't who you think it is. We often say that you may not know that your neighbor's refrigerator is empty and that they're struggling. All you know is you wave to them as they're going in and out of their house, whether their car runs or not. And so the challenges that people are having it's always an educational opportunity for us when talking to policymakers.
Thank you for that. And I must remind folks that our members of Congress are going back home for spring recess, right? So they're going to be there for 2 weeks. Show them to your shelter, show them to your food pantry, to your food bank, to your policy organization, and let them see the humans behind these policies and who they are affecting. It's very important to do so. And I know Michael J. talked about like demographics and data. Reach out to us. We're happy to help you with talking points. That is our job. That's the reason of our name. We will go ahead and include our contact information. Where thank you again for joining, and I'll open it up really quickly to our panelists for any other last words they might want to share.
I can kick us off in the closing, y'all. I just want to share gratitude to all the community that showed up today. Gratitude to Irene and all of the panelists today. Y'all are like real life, super powered beings bringing like healing and possibilities and justice to our communities. I hope that everybody takes away from this that you're not alone, that the better that we care for each other, the better that we can show up for community. And y'all, we don't need movements that burn us out and reproduce the same harm that we're trying to alleviate. So we can make our movements healthier, more joyful, and more pleasurable, the more that we can sustain each other and provide possibilities that are transforming, because that's their foundation. So shout out to you all and sharing my appreciations to you all. And if there's anything that we can do to support you, you have access to all of our information via internet, and we're pretty easily to find people. So just be patient with us with our blessed and colorful inboxes, because those stay popping. So we do our best to keep up. But thank you all so much again, and passing the mic to our next speaker who would like to close us out.
All right, Dawn, if you're gonna make me go next, then you can be after me. I wanna thank you, Ruben, for all of that and for the energy you bring to all of this. And the thing that I'm gonna remember the most is when you said to people that they are not alone. And so whether you are on this call or not, you are not alone, that there are people like you struggling in every community in this country, and we are with you and we want to work with you. And the thing I'd like to say is, I often say when people say, what does defeat look like? What happens when you don't succeed? And I say, what do you mean don't succeed? All we've done is not succeed for now. This isn't over. The path for justice, the struggle to do what we need to do to be successful doesn't end at a legislative session or in a moment or in a day. We are continually going to work to make sure we bring economic justice to people, that we bring food security to our communities, and there's no loss. There's only a temporary loss. We're going to continue to work with, with you, Ruben, with you, Dawn, with Irene and Gina and everyone. We're going to continue to move this forward. It's not about a scorecard that we keep track of today and tomorrow. This is a long-term struggle.
Thank you, Michael J. Dawn, any last words? Don't want to put you on that. We're good. But I'll speak for Dawn, and just remember those relationships with the state, those have really big impact of individuals that our offices sometimes can help. So think that those administrative waivers have just across the board helped thousands, if not millions of individuals. And if you need assistance with that, please let us know how we can be a resource to all of you. So happy Tuesday. Keep up the good work, and we will follow up with an email. Thank you again to our panelists and for all of you who took your time to watch our webinar. We hope that it was useful and that it can help you with your advocacy. Have a wonderful day.